So guys, do you want to just kick off by quickly introducing yourself to the audience?
Yep, so first of all, thanks Dimitri, this is a great event. So I'm Will, the CTO of a company called Heterogeneous. We're based in Cambridge. We are a technology platform for essentially trying to make science better. So we are a medical data sharing startup. So we allow researchers to query existing people who have been sequenced and who have their medical data available. And we allow patients, especially rare disease patients, to be paid directly through our platform and reimbursed, because that's amazingly, a system like that doesn't exist. And we try and make the cost of doing science cheaper by an order of magnitude. That's sort of our slogan. So yeah, that sort of sums me up, I think. Pass it on.
Thanks for having me. I'm Ross. I'm a neuroscientist. Well, actually, I'm a computational neuroscientist, so that means cutting up brains and then building mathematical models of what I find. So I did my undergrad at Cambridge, moved to UCL to do my master's in mathematical modeling, and then I stayed at UCL to do my PhD in computational neuroscience. Then finishing my PhD, I set up Limbic, of which I'm the CEO. At Limbic, we're an AI company, obviously, and our approach is to look at AI from a more human perspective. We believe the missing piece of the AI puzzle is emotional intelligence. What I mean by emotional intelligence is the ability to recognize the feelings of others and use this to inform our decisions and behavior. So, we're trying to build an emotion recognition system which senses the feelings of a human user and provides this signal to the computer to augment and enhance our digital products. So that's what we do at Limbic.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me today. So my name is Jamil Marafi. I'm co-founder and CEO of Headlight AI. So I actually come from quite a mixed background. I originally studied a master's in chemistry. I then went and worked as an R&D consultant, where I was working for a specialist consultancy, which was helping companies with R&D tax credits. So I've been involved in both sales there and also consultancy there. I then went on to, I wanted to start a deep tech company, so I ended up going back to academia. I studied a field called plastic electronics, which is basically carbon-based electronics rather than silicon. And then I ended up going in to do my PhD, also at Imperial College, where I was looking at new materials and processes for organic light-emitting diodes, so OLED technology. So I'd say most of my expertise is actually resolved around materials, the way light interacts with materials in the environment, and yeah, so in OLED technology, light-based sensing. So currently, I'm CEO, co-founder of Headlight AI. So we're developing an adaptive sensing and mapping technology, which will enable sensors to operate in harsh environments. So if in the next few years, there's going to be well over 100 billion sensors, globally. Now, these sensors are going to be utilized in nearly every single market. However, there's a number of problems that need to be solved here. So one of those problems is the amount of data that we're going to need to handle and process in real time to make real use of these sensors. The other side is to overcome some of the environmentally dependent limitations of these sensors. So at Headlight AI, we're looking to solve those problems. We are basically looking at multi-sensor data. We are analyzing this multi-sensor data using machine learning. We're applying compressive sensing algorithms to these as well so that we can process this in real time, handle a lot of data in real time, and basically see beyond human vision, basically get hidden details and apply that to the technologies we're developing. So this obviously applications within autonomous systems, so autonomous vehicles, drones, robots, and specifically one of the things we're trying to solve here is overcoming harsh environments, so bad environments, bad weather, rain, fog, dealing with these poor visibility conditions. In addition, static monitoring systems. So these are some of the areas we're looking in. I'm very out of time, but I have a few more things to say in the introduction, which is, first of all, we're targeting infrastructure monitoring. You have to choose a market when you're developing a business. So we're targeting infrastructure monitoring, specifically the water industry, and also the automotive industry for obvious reasons for autonomous vehicles and assistive driving. Yeah, I'm a bit wary I'm going a bit too long, but I can talk more about this after as well.
So I'd like to begin by asking people what they did before their current startup. So guys, can you just talk about your previous entrepreneurial projects and any key milestones from them, or what were the key learnings from them, for example?
Yeah, I didn't actually talk about that, I realised, after listening to these two. So yeah, I originally did my undergrad in mathematics at UCL. That's how I knew Dimitri. Then I went off to Cambridge for a master's in computer science, then a PhD. So that was in mathematical genomics. So essentially trying to understand the genome in a computational way, which is a challenge, but it was a great experience, and we now understand how broken medical research is, so that's a good experience, I guess. So yeah, that was my background. I guess the first thing that I did sort of entrepreneurial was not so entrepreneurial, but I ran UCL Entrepreneurs. That was my first taste of this whole sort of scene. That was back in 2013. Great fun, great experience, and definitely planted the seeds, I would say, of wanting to sort of do this. But it took me a bit of time before I found the right team and got the right sort of skills where I was ready to take on the challenge of, not working for a tech company and trying to build one myself. So that was sort of my background.
Cool. So in terms of entrepreneurial experience, not that much, but definitely a predisposition to side projects. So never full-timed entrepreneured, but always had something on the go in terms of something that I thought, this could make it big, and then I'll drop what I'm doing right now if this takes off, which was, I think, a flawed way of looking at things. But while I was at my undergrad in Cambridge, I started a music record label because I realized that I myself wasn't very good at playing music, but I met a lot of people who were good at it. And then various little websites here and there because I thought digital might just be the future. Finally, when in between my undergrad and masters, I actually started a viral marketing website that managed to gain some decent traction, and we had a target of paying off our student debt in a year, my friend and myself, and we managed to do it. Ask me more about that afterwards if you want to hear more. But I would say that the first time my entrepreneurial journey began when I started at Entrepreneur First, actually. So while I was a hobbyist and had multiple side projects, I only really committed full time, which is what was required after my PhD.
Okay, in terms of entrepreneurial experience, my dad owned a lot of businesses. I grew up actually in the Middle East. He was running a lot of businesses, so I'd say most of that was listening to some of the problems and mistakes that my dad made when he, started his business. That kind of was some of the things that got me really interested in starting a business in the first place. But then, I was also fascinated by science. I loved technology as well, so that's why I ended up going, to do a degree in chemistry. However, once I was doing that, always lots of different business ideas coming to mind. Having ideas is one thing, then actually getting experience is another. So what I then did when I finished my degree, actually, I kind of went really out of my comfort zone. I'd say it's not entrepreneurial experience, but it was real business experience. And I joined, as I mentioned earlier on, I joined this consultancy. I actually started off in sales. So I literally was business development, cold calling on the phone, trying to set up business meetings, completely nothing to do with what I did on chemistry or science. And that was actually really invaluable. So I would say to anyone looking to do something entrepreneurial, put yourself in the deep end, go into something that you don't have experience with and shock yourself from that side. And then I went into consultancy, learned a lot about accounting, finance. Again, all of this was because I wanted to start a technology business. So I wanted to get these new types of skills. So and then once I started my PhD as well, something else I did was I set up my own consultancy business. I knew that I was going to be on a really, really poor salary going back to do a PhD. Going from consulting to be a PhD student again was quite hard. I wanted to get some extra money in. So that was my first real touch with being an entrepreneur. Set up a consultancy business, did that part-time during my PhD, learned how to set up a limited business, all the kind of admin stuff that comes along that, getting your own clients, the sales process. But then, nowadays, the real tech business started, my dream really started. And that's, thanks to EF, basically, and meeting my co-founder, Paneet, who's in the audience today, it allowed me, that was also something I realized was finding a co-founder was so critical. For me, when I started the consultancy business initially, it was actually really hard. So that's something I would recommend for people is find a co-founder with complementary skill sets and go about that way. So yeah, that's my entrepreneur so far.
Actually, interestingly, the question after this one will be about co-founders and how to find them. But before that, could you just talk about your transition from your PhD to startups and what kind of skills proved to be very valuable, which didn't so much?
Yeah, it's a good question, actually. It's kind of hard because a PhD makes you very, very specialized, and if you're a bit too broad, they don't tend to like that. At least that was my experience. They like to sort of almost put you in I hate to say this, but a slight box in that you're the expert of the world, as they sort of call. But unfortunately, it can often be the case that no one really cares about that particular area. So it's kind of a hard thing, but if you learn applicable skills, there can be a mismatch of values, actually, I think, in academia and startup world, at least in my experience. So it's tough, actually. Frankly, it's just working with software. That was the best takeaway that I've had from my PhD, and my particular area was very useful. But my PhD was it was in AI, so that was helpful too. But I'm doing the AI bet for a heterogeneous company. In fact, is a bit of a long-term bet. So we sort of see AI has not really worked in genetics yet, partly because there's not enough data. So the genome is, there's lots of bases, and we're trying to understand what all of these genes and bases do. And we only have a few million people sequenced, and there's 3 billion bases in the genome. So much of that is redundant. It's true, but even if you sort of strip out and look at genotypes where you have maybe between 1 and 10 million specific values of the genome that you're looking at, that's still a much larger P versus N problem if you have maybe 100,000 people. So even if you stack a whole bunch of neurons together on top of a logistic regression classifier, you don't get any better results, in fact. So it's a tough situation, basically. So really, there needs to be more data, and there needs to be a better way of collecting it. So we sort of see at Heterogeneous that we are trying to be the answer to that. We definitely have an AI strategy in mind for the long term. So yeah, that's I think there can be synergies, but it can be unfortunately a bit of a mismatch.
So I'd in part agree with Will. I think that a large amount of the expertise that you build in a PhD, by the very nature of the specialist structure of that process, means that it is unlikely that it will be applicable to what you end up doing, especially if you start up. Unless you go on to do a postdoc in that area, it's likely to not be that applicable. However, I wouldn't undersell it too much, in that, on the one hand, a lot of people a lot of PhD students underestimate what they do know. They're comparing themselves against other PhD students, but their baseline foundational knowledge in some areas actually quite expertise, I have found. The other thing is that depending on the type of PhD you choose, because everyone is different, personally, from my perspective, project management and work ethic and switching between different projects or different strands of project to make an overall goal come together were transferable. Also, public speaking and communication of complicated concepts in a way that a general audience can understand is really, really useful when it comes to trying to explain what it is you're trying to do with your business. So I would say there is a lot of transferable skills, and some basic numerical skills, mathematical skills are transferable, but I would also agree with Will that if you ended up spending many nights on a confocal microscope like I did, I have not yet used that in my current startup.
So I would say the most transferable for me was project planning, prioritization was a big one, and actually something I'm still trying to perfect now. I mean, it becomes extremely important when you're doing a startup, because there's just so many things going on, and you need to know, the list is not going to end. There's going to be a constant list, and it's a similar thing when you're doing your PhD. There's always some other experiment you can do, and you can keep going on and on and on and on. So prioritization is one of the best things I think that I learned whilst I was doing my PhD. Again, some elements of public speaking, I would say, as well. Your own time management, I guess, that comes into prioritization, but your own time management and dedication, and knowing there's an element of flexibility depending on who your supervisor is as well. You might have a supervisor that wants you to work from 8 in the morning till 7 o'clock at night, or some are more flexible and allow you to work whenever you want. When it's your own startup, you choose your working hours, but you end up working very long hours. So that is something as well that you do in a PhD, and I'd say that was another thing that would be transferable, is dedicating a lot of time to solving a problem and dedicating a lot of your own time. So yeah, that's what I would say.
I want to add a few words to that, sorry. So that was some good, actually, those final points. I think I might update my opinion very slightly, and because there's one key thing that you do get in academia that I think you don't, because you got to put it in context, like, what's it compared to? Because if you weren't in academia, you'd be somewhere else, right? You'd be in a business, you'd be working somewhere else in consulting, you'd be doing public speaking there, probably so. Yeah. But I think the difference is that you do get this period of time where essentially you're your own project manager. Mm-hmm. So unless you do, often supervisors can be quite relaxed, in which case you do manage your own time. And if you can manage your own time, then you do get a lot of free time, and that is a big thing. So.
I would also add doing different, at least I tried to do this, was taking advantage of a lot of the different courses that are available. Like most universities now, there's a big push on, entrepreneurship and innovation. So I tried to make the most of all the different business courses and other courses of areas that I didn't know about. So that was very crucial for me too.
So the question on co-founders, where do you find them? What are you looking for in them? And how do you start the conversation with them, I guess? And Jamil, I want you to answer it first because you're the one who brought it up.
I was on the lookout for a co-founder. I was approached by Entrepreneur First, checked them out, they were really good, decided to join them, and I actually met my co-founder at an event. Actually, the first time I met my co-founder was at interview day for Entrepreneur First. Funnily enough, he was the first person I actually met at EF. I didn't have any idea that we'd be working together, a year later. And then we met again at another event that was organized. We started talking. So EF encourages you to talk to lots of different people, find people with complementary skill sets, and try working with them. So I had a few people in mind. I knew I wanted to work in light-based sensing, and I also knew I wanted to find someone that had very complementary skill sets. So I have not written much code. I was looking for someone in deep software, AI, machine learning background, and especially if they had robotics experience or background, that would be an added bonus. Paneet actually had all of those, and I looked into his research that he was doing during his PhD, and it was amazing stuff. And it was highly valuable for the business we're creating, is looking at camouflage, overcoming poor visibility, using light-based sensing. We got on really well, then started working together, started looking at different applications. Actually, we started in looking at waste management applications, and soon realized that it was going to be too hard for us, or it would take too long for us to develop the technology to make a viable business. And that's then we started to look at other more adaptive sensing technologies for infrastructure monitoring and automotive. But yeah, so that's how I met my co-founder.
I'm also an EF graduate. So I've got to be careful not to bestow the virtues on EF too much. They were very good for this particular bit. One of the big problems I have found whenever I tried to start my own thing prior to Entrepreneur First was that I would plunder my own personal and professional network, and the odds of finding somebody who fit quite right are small. And I often tricked myself into thinking that, well, we're mates, so of course we're going to be able to set up a company together. That was not true. So when I joined Entrepreneur First, as Jamil's already covered, we're encouraged to speak to a lot of different people. I think we even spoke to each other at one point. Yeah, we had a chat. So it must have been about 75 people I spoke to, and my co-founder, Sebastian, was a software engineer who's previously made digital products, and what we were trying to build was a tool to make digital products, and he could productize my machine learning algorithms, and it was just the right fit. And also you've got to bear in mind that it's not just about having the complementary skill set, which obviously is, check one. It's also about somebody who's committed to starting the type of business that you're trying to start. And not just sort of, I'll go along with this until while it suits me. Everybody on the Entrepreneur First program was ostensibly up for starting a business and really committing their time to this full time. So it actually was a very useful component of the program, and I would thoroughly recommend it to anybody who wants to start a business and is looking for a co-founder to do that.
So I'm bucking the trend here, I guess. But I guess I've got a good story about how I met. So Patrick is my one of my co-founders. He's the CEO. So we both we were studying. It was 2014. Around then, and we had just sort of started our respective courses, and there's a whole bunch of talks and events at the start of the year, etc. And we're at the same college as well. And there must have been about 6 or 7 talks that we would go to on like technology, on crypto, on AI, on lots of different very, very varied things, and that we would inevitably just see each other there, sort of fortuitously. So that was sort of telling, and we sort of realized we should probably hang out, even if we should probably just hang out. We have mutual interests. So that's how I first met him, and then we became friends. But we always kept in touch, always had side projects going on. I'd always talk to him, with about lots of things that I was working on, him the same. And so when we started to get a bit more serious, throughout when I was doing my PhD and he was sort of doing his, then we started to work a bit more concretely on things. And then we also met our third co-founder, Charlotte, as well, who's actually, so we were all working at the same institute. That was how we would hang out and work on this side project that was growing larger and larger and larger. So that was sort of Actually, so there were sort of friends who became my co-founders, and it's all going so far so good. So long may that go. So.
Talking now about the business itself, how did you go about validating the pain problems you're trying to solve for your customers, and how did you go about securing your first clients?
Should I take this first? Because, so I guess we thought there was a problem because we could see lots of research organizations spending 6-figure sums on projects that, frankly, were badly organized, badly managed, and really, really ineffectively getting data into researchers' hands. So that was our first clue that something was awry. Then we started to talk to pharmaceutical companies who are, many of whom are in Cambridge, and we realized that they were spending a lot of money recruiting people for their studies, and they would resequence people who had already been sequenced in the project because they couldn't find the data, or it was a new project, so they had to restart from scratch every single time. And so they didn't even have a patient identity that they would go to and manage and use this patient identity into different studies that this, or clinical trials that this pharma company would be operating in. So that's how we sort of sniffed that something was awry. And we realized that pretty confident that we can do the same thing better, cheaper, faster on cloud infrastructure, and adhere to best security practices, and also pay patients directly, all of which was handled by a myriad of third-party middle organizations that start from the top of the chain of pharma down to lots of these middling organizations that frankly didn't add much value. So that's how we, our first client, we're securing our first big client, hopefully. But if not, that's fine. There are other options. But that was, we convinced them that they didn't need to be spending how much that they were spending. That was basically it.
So with Limbic, as I said, we believe there is some tech that should exist that doesn't today. Now, emotion recognition is often a novel concept when it comes to trying to integrate this into artificial intelligence, but it's actually been around for a while. It's gathering momentum in recent years, but typically companies who focus on this use computer vision and natural language processing as their ways of solving this problem. For obvious reasons, if I'm smiling, I'm probably happy, so you can just detect that with a camera, and now we've got an emotion recognition system. So computer vision is often used in advertising, these focus groups that get brought in to evaluate a product. Speech processing, NLP, is often used in call services and customer services. And together, there are some other industries, but together these use cases make up about $7 billion US in market. But the important thing is that it could be so much bigger. And our belief at Limbic was that the way to make this bigger is to use the third pillar of emotion recognition, which is using your physiology, your biometric information. And we're now at an exciting time when more and more people are wearing wearable devices, computers on the body, measuring your heartbeat. So we now have access to a data set that we've never before had. So with all this in mind, that's the preface. We thought we need to create some technology that doesn't exist. To do that, we need the training data to train our machine learning models. But to get the training data, we need customers to be using our product so they can start funneling the data. So where does this cold start problem begin? So the way we went out and we got our first clients were we said, look, we want to build this system. We think it'd be awesome for you. But right now we can't do it. Not yet. We're going to be able to do it in about a year's time. That's the timeline we think we can do this on. But right now what we can offer you is a very, very crude version of it, the minimum viable product, as you'll hear quite a lot. And for us that was a stress detection algorithm. So that stress detection is much, much easier than other emotional states like joy, sadness, fear, anger. Stress from a heartbeat is easier to pull out. So we used what was already existing in the technological literature. We packaged this as a platform for developers to use, and they started to use it, which validated our hypothesis that the makers of digital products do indeed want some tool to understand their user's psychological state better. In this case, it was stress. So they start using it, they start pushing data to our servers, and now we have the training data that we can use to develop the core tech. And that's kind of been the client acquisition process with Limbic.
So I would say for us, what we did, we knew what we were capable of doing. So I knew a lot about materials, photophysics, how light interacts with different materials and environments. And Puneet's been working on light-based sensing and AI, robotics. So we knew the kind of things that we could look into solving. And as I mentioned before, we started with waste management. The main method we did this was, I knew of a load of different problems and a load of different markets, but I needed to find out more from the actual people that are working in those industries. Predominantly what I did was, or we did at that point, I then extended that later, was find different companies working in those sectors, contact people on LinkedIn, cold call people, try and find out who the relevant people that were actually in those industries facing these problems. And I'll give you one example with the water industry, because that's where we're primarily operating at the moment. So again, there's so many different contractors and different companies working within the water industry itself. It's quite a complex market. So I started talking to water contractors, people that were literally going and inspecting tunnels and sewer systems, and started to realize more and more what some of the problems were. Now, one of the key things here is not to put your idea of what the problem is to these people, but to literally just ask them about their processes that they do, what are the problems that they experience. Because otherwise you're going to influence your decision and you're going to create a business that you're not actually solving a real problem. So it soon came to light that there was a lot of problems in the water industry. Especially here in the UK, you're talking, sewer networks over 100 years old, and you're talking about hundreds of thousands of kilometers of sewers and tunnels in the UK. I mean, there's literally enough to go to the moon and back. That's how big. And they need to inspect them. Current methods are very slow. They're using quite old technology. And what happens when things don't go right? You get flooding, you get burst water mains, you see all these kind of things on the news. And it soon came to light that they were still using a lot of old technology, and there was a lot of space to innovate, and especially a lot of space to innovate with new forms of sensing and also autonomy. So they're still using a lot of manually operated robots. These are complex environments that we're dealing with. And that's kind of how we kind of got to the problem. We started to realize people were very, very keen to tell us about those problems. And then soon there was a pull rather than us trying to get into a market. There was literally someone saying, please come and help us look into this. We'll pay you money to look into this. And that's when you know that you're starting to be onto a problem that you can look to solve. So.
Moving on to a more technical question, can you talk about different AI and machine learning models you're using, and how are you thinking about data acquisition?
Yeah, so I guess I'll probably talk more about data acquisition, but we can talk about lots of people have tried to use stacked neural networks as classifiers on medical data, and as I sort of said before, there's with limited effects so far. That's what we've tried to use as well. We've sort of validated for ourselves that that's indeed the case before betting our entire companies on that sort of premise. So there's that. But so we use cloud services to acquire and host user data. We adhere to industry standards. We don't use blockchain. That's one. One thing we don't do, it's worth saying. But we do let you know and let you have control about how your data is used, which is obviously needs to be said. But we actually will pay you for your data in the way that we think you should be if you make it available for us. And we think that's just the way it should be. It shouldn't really be in any other way, rather than have people like 23andMe make lots of money in intermediate deals. So yeah, it's kind of as simple as that. If you make your data available, then you should be remunerated, especially if you're helping research. Research is in being a control participant in a study, for example, whether you have a rare disease and you want to be included in a research project that's going on and it's very difficult to recruit for, because pharma companies will pay thousands and thousands of pounds to recruit people. It's kind of amazing. So yeah, that's what we do in that sphere.
So machine learning models, neural networks, obviously. Ours is a time series analysis problem. So the problem formulation for being able to extract the emotional state of somebody from their physiological time series requires a similar toolbox to what you might use in speech processing, where you're trying to extract the hidden word meaning from an audio wave. It's a time series and it's got discrete segments which mean something. So we're using recurrent neural networks, hidden Markov models, Gaussian processes, all the usual suspects in that space, pre-processing and creating a pipeline that actually makes sense for the problem that we're trying to solve. In terms of the data, Will touched upon it. GDPR has stepped in, and we're all waiting to see what's going to happen. But I think largely it's a very good thing. It's about time that companies were responsible and no longer had a blank check to do whatever the hell they wanted with people's data. We see it at Limbic as a transaction with the user. It's their data that they are sending to us. It allows us to perform a service which we ultimately hope is going to make their lives better and augment their digital experience. If it's not being used in that way, then the transaction doesn't make sense anymore and we don't get the data. It's kind of as simple as that, really.
So I'll try and answer this as best I can, but you're probably better off speaking also in more detail with our CTO after the talk to go into a bit more detail. However, what I would say is we look at data from multiple sensors. Predominantly at the moment, we're looking at radar, LiDAR, imagery, sonar, and then basically we apply, and we're collecting this either through trials with companies, or we go out on our own and collect that data in harsh environments. And basically, we use a combination of, well, first of all, we actually apply compressive sensing algorithms to that because we need to filter that data. And then that's when we start to apply machine learning, and we apply both unsupervised and supervised models. And as I say, we pretty much get the data from a combination of our clients and also from our own trials and experiments, basically.
Okay, so final question from me. And just before I ask the question, I would like to invite audience to submit any questions they may have via Slido, tweet at us, or alternatively just Wayne, raise your hand, or we'll send you a mic, whatever you like. The final question I was going to ask you was, as you're starting to grow your companies, how are you thinking about differentiating yourself from all the other startups, especially when it comes to, say, hiring?
How to differentiate? Well, we are hiring, so that's putting words out onto great people like you. That's sort of how we get our nose in there. I think that we're all quite mission driven. So lots of people work with health data. Lots of people have their own strong opinions about how health data is used. We certainly have our own very strong opinions, and we honestly just really don't like seeing patients, people who provide the data who have diseases they are struggling with, ultimately not get remunerated at the end of the day when they make their data available. So, it depends. That mission is strong with some people, but not with others. It's strong with us. But if you sort of feel that pull, then we certainly do as well. So, we're hiring for multiple technical roles. Also business development roles as well, so lots of rare disease recruiting and speaking to patients as well. That's sort of what we're up to.
Defending against competition is a big one that comes up when you're trying to pitch a startup to investors and indeed just sort of make it watertight for yourselves moving forward. Quickly, defensibility from other companies is a big one. From our perspective, it's that proprietary data set that is, we think, already the largest in the world of its kind, and so long as people keep using our platform, it keeps growing. So we have the edge on our competitors trying to build the technology from that regard. Also, it always helps to create a product which has an intrinsic dependency. So if you are an engine upon which other products are built, it's quite a sticky product, and pulling that away leads to quite a lot of customer pain. So that's our competitive advantage out in the market. When it comes to hiring, really challenging for a startup to be competitive while hiring. We pay a reasonable amount, but we cannot compete with Google and Apple and Facebook. We just can't do that. So we need to make sure that the type of work and the working environment is enough to pull people away from those other jobs, because we're hiring at the caliber of candidate that would be applying to these other big tech companies. So we need to make sure that it's a good team, it's a fun project, sort of people's personal development is respected and they've got a lot of autonomy and respect. And then so long as we're all having fun and money isn't an issue, then we're all heading in the right direction and hopefully building something great. That's all I can really say. We don't have another competitive advantage when it comes to hiring against Google.
So I'd say for us, in terms of differentiation, there's obviously a lot of competition in our space. However, what a lot of them are doing, what a lot of our competitors are doing, are sensor fusion. So they are looking at multiple sensor data, fusing that together to give some new insights. What we're doing different is how we use that data to actually input into the sensor parameters and how we change the way sensors actually operate in different conditions. So we have some IP around that. So that's one side. So the way we protect as well is through patents. Essentially, we are an IP company and we are filing patents. So that's our key differentiation, and also where we are operating in. There's really not much competition especially in the water infrastructure monitoring space and the whole kind of underground, more complex environment space. So that's also where we differentiate, and through the collection of novel data. So in terms of hiring, we are also hiring, and we are looking to get people that think differently about these types of problems, and people that want to be involved in creating new types of IP. So people with that strong drive to do R&D and to do R&D in areas where it's going to have a big impact in high impact applications.
We have our first question on Slido. How do you deal with setbacks and failure in general?
So we don't know who asked the question. Anonymous. Who put? We're keeping anonymous. Okay, fine. Obviously, well, what can I say that's not already been blogged about for lots and lots and lots. I think everyone has their own personal ways. Obviously, you just got to take it in your stride. I think there's nothing more we can really say. You've got to take it in your stride. I've got no hacks, unfortunately. Obviously, when it sucks, but then I don't know. I guess I always would have preferred this to working for a company. So for me, it was like, well, it's fine. It sucks working for a company sometimes too, so whatever. It's fine.
Yeah, I think you can think of it as a latent variable problem where there are two sources. One is you are on the right track, but there's a distribution of outcomes. Some of those are not positive. And then there's another source, which is you are on the wrong track, and there's a distribution of outcomes, some of which are positive just due to random noise. And you need to sample enough sort of experience points in order to work out probabilistically, probably from like a Bayesian perspective, which one you are in. And that's all I do. I just turn the lights off and do that. So I mean, I genuinely think that you can't just fluctuate with the noise. You can't be like, oh, I've had a win, I'm the greatest. Oh, I've had a loss, I'm worthless. You kind of need to integrate over time, but also just being emotionally resilient, because I think you kind of need to strap in because things will not go well at times. So you need to get through the bad bits, and then also take it as a signal if too many bad things are happening that you're probably on the wrong track.
So yeah, I would say I struggled with this early on when I was much younger, and even when I started working. I think I always thought I was always doing quite well at school, then I did really well at university, and then went into work, and then you start to do some new things, and you can't cope with some things, you make some mistakes, you get critical feedback from certain people, and then at first you take it a bit personally. And if any of you have read the book Mindset, it's all about growth mindset. I probably had a bit of a fixed mindset, and I wasn't allowed, I was just thinking, oh, why are they complaining about this? Over time, you learn to deal with that, and you start to take the criticism, you start to learn to cope with the failure, you start to not take it personally, and you just start to try and learn from it. I mean, that's all I can say. To whoever asked that question, read the book Mindset. It's quite a good way of looking at how you can turn these failures into positive experience and change your behavior.
I would also just quickly add on to that another thing that's really helped us is having good advisors. So we've got a scientific advisor and a business advisor, and on the business advisor particularly, if something seems really wrong and bad, and I don't know whether to take this as a signal that we are failing as a company, or if we can handle this, just put it to somebody whose opinion you trust and get their external perspective, and they might say roll on, or we need to pivot around this.
I'm just going to rotate and just offer anyone in the audience to ask a question. So does anyone have a question to ask? All right, never mind. Unless there is a question.
Yeah, I think you guys did a great talk. This has been quite interesting. I wanted to ask if, kind of based off what you said about mindset, do you have any books that you read, I guess, not like a reading list, but like, I know how people come back to things in their dire times. Do you have anything like that, maybe like certain things that keep you going in, like Churchill will say, your darkest times? Not how to deal with it, obviously, but like how you, or like what's your anchor?
About dealing with hard times, or books? Are you saying recommendations?
Yeah, I guess like.
Another good book I would say to read is Hard Thing About Hard Times, something like that. That's another good one. Reading is one. Keep reading. I think I've read so much more in the last year than I have, previous 5, I'd say, on these kind of other books to help you deal with these kind of failures and problems that come up. For me, started doing a lot of exercise. That also helped. Honestly, I was quite unfit before, and I'm trying to. Still a long way to go. Started doing a lot more exercise. Actually, that really helps. Just taking your mind off something. Many people tell me to do meditation. I haven't really started it properly, but I'm probably going to. Those are some of the things I would recommend.
I have a quick comment on the reading list thing, and I think this opinion is probably a bit controversial because a lot of people have that book that they really love. But I found, at least in sort of getting advice on the entrepreneurial space, the books that are recommended, there are some really great sort of anecdotes which are awesome and they're cool for painting a picture, and no doubt there is wisdom in there, but it's not at all an exact science. And I found it quite a frustrating process because in one story it's, you've got to stick to your guns and know what you want to do and not let anybody else tell you that it's wrong, and that's why you're going to be successful. And then in the other story it's just like, see, the problem was he didn't listen to everybody else giving him feedback, and that's why he was unsuccessful. So I find that quite stressful. I prefer to talk to somebody whose opinion I respect, who knows about my business and can sort of bespoke comment on what we're doing, and we can have a back and forth conversation where we can sort of explore ideas together. That's what I prefer when things are going a bit dodgy.
I actually have one that I just quite recently finished. And that's, I'm a bit of a Nassim Taleb fan, but he's a controversial figure. But his anti-fragile one is quite poignant. Basically, he sort of says that, basically shit happens, like lots of uncertainty, volatility happens, but the ones, you have to essentially be able to thrive in that environment, and that's how, that's sort of the name of the game. It is tough, there's lots of uncertainty, and you have to be able to be good at being uncertain about things. That's the whole point of not having a boss, I guess. And he has a really good strategy, I think, which is he calls the barbell strategy because he started lifting weights when he was 40 or something, I don't know why. But he says that you should have like high-risk strategies that you try and essentially get to people who don't appreciate or don't calculate odds correctly. They underestimate how often they happen. So for the Black Swan events, you'll be lifted up. But also resort to having a few strategies that are very solid, that you can absolutely rely on. So he sort of hates things in the middle. So he basically has it's either extreme, like lots of things that are going to fail, probably going to fail, but might be big, but then you have your rock solid base. So I think that's actually, I think that's quite a good philosophy.
So, yeah, what Ross was saying on advisors is a good one. Just talking to different advisors and their opinions actually takes a lot of the weight off. Now, one other thing I would say is you can't listen to everyone, and this is something I also learned. You can talk to lots of different people, get lots of different opinions. At some point, you also need to choose who to listen to and who not to listen to. But definitely speaking to different advisors helps to just get things off your chest and kind of push you in a certain direction.
So I think unfortunately we've got just enough time for one more question. So on Slido, someone has asked, what's your take on raising external funding versus friends, family, bootstrapping? Are there any trends, traits applicable to the entire AI startup scene?
I think now's a good time to raise money. I think you should not raise money from friends and family. I think that's not a good idea, personally. But it really depends. It's really hard to say generally. I think it often depends on the specific problem that you think that you can do better than what's out there. Because sometimes you might need 200K. Sometimes you might just need a good 3 months without working so you can code it up and put it on a website. So it's very, 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 very hard to say. I think it's nice to have your parents believe in you, but ultimately you want to try and separate that as much as you possibly can, because if you don't, then you can get to the point where there's no escape. So you want to have some people to talk to who don't think of you as a startup founder, because then that's just very stressful, I think. So having people who don't have a vested interest in that side of you is good. Whether it's your parents or not, maybe it's someone else.
Yeah, I would agree. I think taking money from friends and family adds personal risk onto professional risk, and it's not something that I would do lightly. Also, just generally, when it comes to taking money, do it if you need it. You know what your business needs, you know what your targets are over the next 18 months to 2 years, and you know where you need to get for your next big goal and when you're ready to raise again, if you are ready to raise again. If you're revenue generating and you can support all the employees you need and you can hit all the targets you need, why would you take money? It totally depends on the business. If you are, often AI startups need an injection of capital in order to get somewhere, so take as much as you need to get to where you need to go, would be my advice.
Yeah, I would say it's very different to get money from family and friends and to get money from a VC. I mean, you're going to be obviously you're going to try and spend the money wisely either way, but your family and friends are probably going to be worried if you start spending your money too fast, whereas VCs probably a little bit the opposite. They want you to spend the money fast. They want you to hire and get ahead of everyone. So it's a very different kind of perspective. And, I think you would feel quite personally, you wouldn't want to be as risky maybe with your own, money from family and friends. So, we're raising right now. EF has helped us in the past, and now we are raising again. We're with an accelerator called Public. We're on the GovStart program, and we're now literally going out again to raise right now. So it's not easy. I've never, I didn't do that before. I didn't raise money from VCs in the past, so I learned a lot, and I'm continuing to learn. But for AI tech startups, in the majority of case, it's necessary to raise VC funding so that you can accelerate the business and get ahead of the competition as fast as possible.
Okay, great. Well, I think that kind of summarizes the event. Can we just give a round of applause to the panelists? And I would also like to thank all of you for coming today. I hope you found it very enjoyable. And I would like to also just invite you all to kind of follow Founders Time on social media. And I would also like to kind of kick off a small challenge we're having. Essentially, YouTube doesn't allow me to have a unique URL. So if you could all subscribe to my YouTube channel so I can get up to 100 subscribers to get my unique URL, that would be amazing. Thank you very much all for coming.